Dear permission, I'll take questions 1 to 3 together. There were meetings of the Cabinet Committee G in 2018 on the 18th of January, the 16th of April, and most recently on the 12th of December. The next committee has not yet been scheduled. Cabinet Committee G provides political oversight of developments in relation to justice and equality issues, including implementation of the Government's programme of reform for the justice sector. In relation to justice reform, the Effectiveness and Renewal Group is due to publish its 3rd report shortly, and this will feed into the committee's work. Last month, the Government approved a policing service for the future, the Government's 4-year plan to implement the recommendations of the Commission on the Future of Policing in Ireland, chaired by Kathleen O'Toole. Cabinet Committee G is part of the oversight architecture of the plan and will receive regular progress reports on its implementation. The plan also envisages 2 meetings per year of the Cabinet Subcommittee, focusing in particular on community safety.
Thank you. First question from Deputy Brendan Howlin.
Can I ask the Taoiseach whether the Cabinet Committee has discussed the implementation of the new legislation on drink driving? Despite what has gone on previously, I want to venture into that area. And can I ask, Taoiseach, do you agree with the views expressed by Minister Ross in writing in one of the national newspapers this weekend that ministers who criticised the drink driving legislation enacted by this House are not fit for office? Do you agree with that statement? A report last week also found 3,500 children were not prosecuted, with almost 8,000 crimes being investigated over a period of 7 years due to failure of An Garda Síochána to prosecute. There was 3,400 victims impacted by those crimes. It's understood that what was published was an interim report. Can I ask what was the Cabinet Committee, if they did discuss it, and I'm sure something as shocking as that must have been discussed, what was the reaction to it? And finally, can I ask you, in relation to the implementation of the 157 key recommendations in the Policing Authority, currently under the purview of the Policing Authority, how far have we progressed in relation to the implementation of those key recommendations? And is it, just as a matter of interest, is it normal for the Chair of the Policing Authority to attend at the Cabinet Committee for discussion of these matters?
Next, Deputy McDonald.
Thank you, Lescan Corla. Taoiseach, I want also to raise that issue that emerged last week, that almost 8,000, well 7,894 to be precise, criminal offences committed by 3,489 child suspects between the years of 2010 to 2017 were not progressed because of Garda inaction. There was a failure to progress cases regarding one child 37 times, as well as 2,500 cases in which there were multiple offences. 55 of the offences identified were deemed to be of a serious nature, including one rape, one sexual assault and one child neglect case. So it was very shocking stuff, Taoiseach. And to think that somebody went to the Gardaí about a serious crime, like a rape or a violent assault, and that nothing actually happened is really, really scandalous. I don't doubt that there were systems failures here. I think the Garda Commissioner and the Minister for Justice need to address those urgently. Those responsible have to be held to account for this. And we also need to look at the chronic under-resourcing of the Gardaí and the consequences of having a service that doesn't have the tools to perform the functions expected of us. The Pulse network, at least from the outside looking in, seems antiquated and not fit for purpose. But above all, Taoiseach, it is very, very concerning that this might not be the end of the matter. And the chairperson of the Policing Authority has indicated that there might be additional issues. Listen to what was said. It must be an open question as to whether similar behaviours and therefore similar lapsed cases and similar opportunities to re-offend have occurred in relation to adult offenders. So I want to ask you, Taoiseach, Is that the case?
Deputy Micheál Martin.
Policing reforms are matters which there have been ongoing discussions about in this House well over a number of years now, and particularly over the last 12 months. And you may recall there was specific focus last year on the Department of Justice itself and the necessity of reforms there. And you will remember as Taoiseach that in December 2017, you stated on a number of occasions that the department was, quote, not fit for purpose, unquote, and you said it needed both a new structure and a new culture. And since then, a number of internal changes have taken place at senior management level, including the creation of a Deputy General Secretary position. Are you now satisfied, Taoiseach, that the department is fit for purpose? And can you believe that sufficient changes have been made to ensure that the culture, which you strongly criticised, has actually changed? Also, in terms of the car bomb incident in Derry on Saturday night, again, it was by pure chance that a group of teenagers which passed the car were not caught up in the blast. If you can indicate the security assessment of the potential of these organisations and the degree of police cooperation between the PSNI and Garda Síochána in relation to activities of these particular groups. Thirdly, in relation to the Commissioner's announcement last week in terms of thousands of offences not being prosecuted in relation to young offenders, would it be possible, Taoiseach, I think it is possible, but I'd ask that a detailed report would be presented to the Oireachtas by the Minister for Justice on this. To a certain extent, the announcement came out of the blue. There was no indication in advance that something of that nature or scale was developing. The Policing Authority has described it as the most serious issue yet to come before them in relation to these issues. And that's notwithstanding all of the McCabe dossier and the penalty point saga and so on. The Policing Authority seem to be saying this is the worst that has come before them. So the scale and nature of the failure and what precisely was involved, Taoiseach, I think there's a need and an obligation, given the gravity and scale of this, to have a full report to the Oireachtas.
Deputy Joan Burton has tabled a question.
Thank you, Lascan Corla. Taoiseach, of all the issues that are difficult in communities and in terms of community building, the whole issue of what you might broadly call antisocial behaviour, serious antisocial behaviour, and fears, particularly among a lot of older people, around crime and crime involving young people, not just antisocial behaviour, but also areas like very irresponsible driving and even kids getting cars and driving them in a really dangerous, irresponsible way. It has, I think, bedevilled a lot of communities and a lot of people on community and residents associations as to why so many of these young people could never be dealt with. And to be perfectly honest, the information about what was happening to me seemed to always essentially go into a black hole. I have known many JLO officers who have been extremely assiduous in helping young people coming into difficulty with the law and perhaps going down a pathway which would end very badly for themselves and their families. So I have to say I welcome the policing authority investigation and the comments of the Commissioner. But it leads me to question again the decision that you announced on behalf of your government very recently, that essentially you are going to effectively dissolve the independence of the policing authority, which was a proposal that Fine Gael as a party eventually agreed to the Labour Party when we were in government. I know you were not a great fan as a political party. I don't know your individual thoughts on it. But in all honesty, having communities that feel safe and young people who, if they get into trouble with the law, can be dealt with properly is fundamental to our policing system. And now you're talking about dissolving the authority that finally has actually given the public a report into this extremely important area. And Taoiseach, Would this report, I don't know if you had sight of this perhaps some time ago before we heard of it through the media, but would you not think that you should reconsider the indications that you gave us some weeks ago about policing reform, and that maintaining an independent policing authority is critical to the safety of our citizens and to the work of the Gardaí?
4 minutes to respond.
Thanks, Taoiseach Corla. Going back to the initial questions, in terms of the Cabinet Subcommittee, the Cabinet Subcommittee hasn't discussed the implementation of the new drink driving laws. I think it's important to remind the House that alcohol limits have not changed. I know some people believe that they have changed. They haven't. What's changed is the penalties. And the legislation, while it was piloted through these houses by Minister Ross, is not Minister Ross's legislation. It's legislation that was approved by government and legislation that was enacted by these Oireachtas. I'm 37 seconds in and I'm already being interrupted. I will try and answer as many questions as I can. I'll try and answer as many questions as I can, but the number of interruptions makes it harder to answer. As I said, the legislation was adopted by the Oireachtas. The vast majority of members in this House voted for it, as they did in the Seanad. And I, for one, and the government supports the Gardaí in enforcing the law. If we don't want the Gardaí to enforce the law, we shouldn't pass those laws in this House, and they have my full support in enforcing the law. And I don't believe that any minister currently serving in government is unfit for office, and if I did feel that, I would dismiss them. I was asked about the practice...
Sorry, Debbie's Minister without interruption.
I was asked about the practice of the Chair of the Policing Authority attending Cabinet subcommittees. That hasn't happened to my recollection, unless I'm totally mistaken. The Chair of the... not recently anyway. In relation to the crimes that weren't prosecuted, along with everyone in the House, I'm very dissatisfied that thousands of crimes committed by young offenders were not prosecuted. I really feel for the victims, people who haven't got justice, went to the Gardaí, who reported a serious offence in some cases, assumed it would be dealt with, and it was not. In many cases, those offences are now beyond the statute of limitations, so they cannot now be prosecuted. But in some cases, they can still, and it's really important that that should now happen. And I know in some cases, while the offenders may not have been prosecuted for those particular crimes, they were prosecuted for other crimes and did get justice in that regard. But we need to make sure, certainly, that changes are made so that it doesn't happen again. A lot of changes have been made. The essential flaw was that young offenders who were not considered to be appropriate for a juvenile diversion, rather than being pursued and prosecuted, were neither referred for prosecution nor for juvenile diversion. But that shouldn't reflect badly in any way on the juvenile justice programme or the juvenile diversion programme. This works very well and has been very successful, but obviously isn't capable of taking all offences or all offenders, particularly those who've been guilty of the most serious offences. In terms of resourcing for the Gardaí, that's improving all the time. The number of Gardaí now is up to 14,000, the highest in a very long time, and will continue to increase, as will the number of civilians in the force. We have set aside a very substantial budget for investment in IT and equipment and vehicles over the next couple of years. On the reforms that are happening in the Gardaí and the Department of Justice, they're still very much underway. It is a work in progress. The reforms are very much underway in the Department of Justice in terms of restructuring, bringing people in from outside, refreshing the management team, and the programme for the reform of the Gardaí is a 4-year programme and is one that obviously is only getting started. But I am satisfied that it is happening and that things are going in the right direction. We've real opportunity now with new leadership in the Gardaí, a much better resourced budget and a reform plan that we can make the changes now that perhaps should have happened a long time ago. In relation to the events in Derry, once again, I want to condemn the car bomb and the subsequent violence in no uncertain terms. It's not wanted in Derry. I've been to that city many times in the past year or two, And I know that the good people of that city do not want to see this kind of violence back in their streets. And I think we're blessed that no life was lost as a consequence of those events. We've rejected political violence as a people on countless occasions in the past decades, and we still reject it today. And there is very good cooperation between the PSNI and the Garda Síochána when it comes to dealing with Republican groups hell-bent on violence.
Okay, good. Now, we